Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. As always, I'm Stewart Kraintz, and this is your inside track to success. Got an amazing guest for us this week, but before I introduce him, please like, please subscribe, please share this with somebody if you get any value from today's conversation, which I know you will. Cost of admission to this show is free, so we just ask that you share this with somebody, bring more people to the party, so to speak. And without further ado, I want to jump in and introduce tonight's guest. He is somebody that I think we can learn a lot from, particularly in with what's going on in the economy. He is somebody that is on the precipice of paying off 209 plus $1,000 in student debt. He has made it his mission to support people in doing the same, creating the financial freedom in their lives that they are striving for as well. And he's best known on Instagram as at IanBuildsWealth. I want to welcome Ian Group to the show. Ian, thank you for being here tonight.
Ew, thanks for having me.
Again, thank you for being here. And I know that I kind of already buried the lead a bit in terms of the accomplishment that you're about to achieve in terms of paying off such a sizable amount of debt. I would just love to hear, like, what are some of the things that, are kind of like on your mind as you're about to reach this humongous goal?
First of all, again, I appreciate you having me on. It's great to talk to you and be here to kind of like spread the good message.
Sure, sure.
What's on my mind around almost being done with my debt? There's a lot actually that's on my mind. I think first of all, I try to reflect back on where I was 12 years ago now. So
Mhm.
2011, I graduated law school. I just had a call with someone the other day, and this person, I do these kind of like free debt strategy sessions, right? Kind of get to know people, help them see if they're a fit for my program where I help people pay off debt. And this person was saying that they graduated from school coincidentally in 2011,
Mhm.
and they were banking on either some sort of like public service loan forgiveness or debt forgiveness, and they hadn't made any payments on their debt pretty much through today. And their
Wow.
balance went, I think it was like $90,000 for a 3-year program. I'll keep it anonymous. If this person
Sure.
listens, they don't know, but it was, I think, about $160,000. And
Mhm.
I felt like that feeling in my gut, the same feeling I had back in around 2012, because I too did that. I did what's called a forbearance on my loans.
Mhm.
And for most people, when they hear forbearance, they think of the forbearance that happened on student loans during the COVID period, right? Payments were paused, but interest was not accruing. When you did a forbearance, when I did it, or under normal circumstances, the interest keeps accruing. The interest eventually that has been added to your balance gets recapitalized into the principal. So if you
Mhm.
started with $100,000 in debt and you gained about $1,000 of interest, your new balance was $101,000, and interest is accumulating on that. It's
Yeah.
like the reverse kind of compounding. So, long answer to say that when I did that, I did it a few times. My balance grew from 190 to 210. I rounded to 210. You said, 209. It's
Sure.
209 and change, right?
Mhm.
But that feeling of such like helplessness, regret, and anger, that was all present in there. So
Yeah.
that's still very much inside of me. It's what keeps me really motivated to not go back into this situation and to also help others. And then there's a lot of, I'd say, like happiness and
Yeah.
joy. I, I think debt can make people, even if the interest rate is really low, it can just make people feel uneasy. I was looking at my mortgage statement with my wife the other day, and our interest rate on a mortgage is under 3%. And when we got that mortgage, everyone was saying, "Oh, it's like free money." You hear that a lot for a very low mortgage rate, and compared to the rate of return you could get in the market, and anything at 2-3%, it is kind of like free money in the grand scheme of things. But I still was looking at the interest that I was paying every month. And I was saying to myself, it's not free. There's still so much that I'm paying to the bank. And so I'm like talking to my wife. I'm like, is this our next big thing? Are we going to focus now on paying off the mortgage early? So in the early stages, but it's a combination of really mixed feelings. Ultimately, I'm just happy to have it behind me. And now I got to figure out what to do with that extra $2,000 a month.
Yeah, and I guess I just want to ask you that question to kick this off because this is a show where we focus a lot on goals. A lot of people have dreams for home ownership. It's amazing you got in when the rates were so low. I find that oftentimes, and we're going to just continue to use debt as the example here. People have a really big goal. It's staring them in the face. Maybe it's something that even consumes their thoughts each and every day. I think especially is true when we're talking about something like that. However, sometimes the problem is so big that people don't even know where to start or like how who to reach out to or what options are even available. And so when it comes to something like that, how did you actually get the ball rolling and how do you advise people do the same with their own debt journeys?
I'll tell you exactly how I got the ball rolling. The In 2011, when I was faced with all of this, it was a pretty uncertain time for student loan borrowers. There really were not a lot of options to refinance. There were options that you still have today, income-based repayment methods. But I couldn't go out to the market and use a SoFi or a Laurel Road or any of these student loan lenders that exist. So when I graduated law school, I wound up pushing off a lot of the student loans. Like that's how I got started. I was like, I'm not going to think about this. And that was a bad decision. So I would say number one is you have to recognize there's an obstacle there. There's a mountain to climb and you have to figure it out. You really do have to face it. A lot of people that I talk to, whether it's in my DMs or like the debt strategy session, and I could talk more about like my program where I help people pay off debt. But a lot of people, one of the first things I teach is getting organized and facing your debt. And a lot of people say that was like really eye-opening or that they were avoiding doing that for a long time.
What does that involve specifically?
Like getting organized and facing your debt, literally writing down what all of your outstanding debts are. So credit cards, mortgage, student loans, personal loans. What are they? List them all out on paper. How much is the total balance? What's the interest rate? When's the payment date? What's the minimum payment amount? When do you expect to have it paid off? You can use a loan calculator for that. I actually created a sheet where you can do all of this. But that's step number one, is like see the whole thing written down on paper. I did that and it was scary. And around the same, at the same time that I was paying, or I was faced with the student debt after I graduated law school, I also had credit card debt too.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to figure both of these things out. With the credit card, I think I might have had it on different cards. This was, again, back in 2011. But I ultimately used these 0% balance transfer offers to try to pay them off faster. See, you're smiling. So like, have you done this? Do you know about this?
I have fallen into that trap historically. Yes, I have.
So the trap of credit card debt or the trap of like misusing a balance transfer offer?
Misusing the balance transfer offer.
Okay. Yeah, you need to be really sure. There's a little bit of math you have to do. And so what I did was, let's say my credit card had like 20% interest. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The balance transfer offer was basically like 0% interest for 6 months. So, but to do it, you'd have to pay a 3% fee. So you have to basically figure out if I pay that fee, and then if I could pay off that amount within 6 months, and I'm not going to get to the post promotional rate, which is usually much higher than the current rate you're at, right? That's where you have a problem. If I can pay it off within that time, then I'm not going to fall into the trap. And so I actually did it in smaller increments. Like let's say if I had $20,000 in credit card debt, I took maybe 2,000 And I did the offer and I like paid that off. So it like kind of was lowering my effective interest rate. So back to your question, how did I approach all of this? I was dealing with the credit card. I was trying to figure out what to do with my loans. I wrote them all down to see what they were. I had 12 different loans at varying rates and varying amounts. And there was a lot of time where I pushed them off. And I remember being in a car with my parents, like really upset, regretting my decision for going to law school, crying, basically being like, I don't know what the F to do. Keep it PG
Mhm.
rated for the show.
Sure.
And then I very distinctly remember thinking to myself, like, dude, stop crying. You have to figure this out. Like, no one's coming to save you. So figure
Mhm.
it out. And so we'll say it was the next day, but it might have been the next week, whatever. I started to just look online for student loan refinance options. There was not a lot, but I started calling local banks. I was working in Connecticut at the time, and I found a bank in Connecticut that said they were actually starting a program to refinance student loans. There was no cost to do it. The only risk at that time was basically going from a federal student loan to a private loan, where you lose any of the protections that you have that the federal government gives you. The ability to take a forbearance on your loans, while not ideal, it's still something that you have available to you.
Sure.
The ability to use an income-based repayment plan as well. Or if I decide I was going into public service, getting some sort of public service loan forgiveness. But I said to myself at the time, I'm going into private practice. I want to make money. So this seems like a pretty calculated decision. I'm going to do it. And I brought all the loans into one loan. My rate went from 7 to 6%. And I refinanced probably 3 or 4 more times after that. And I eventually got the rate down to 2.35%, sub
Wow.
3%. Yeah, that was a huge win, huge win. And so yeah, those were the steps that I took: getting organized, finding options for lowering my rate. I'll add one more step, which is increasing my income.
Mhm.
That was huge for me. And I recognize that, I was in a position to make a lot more money than most people, but I took a lot of risk on to get there. I went to law school for 3 years. I took on almost $250,000 of debt. The cost of law school wasn't just 210 in loans. There was living expenses and things like that too, right?
Mhm.
So I had to do all of that. And my first job out of law school wasn't making very much money, but then I went to a smaller real estate firm, and then I got recruited to a big law firm where my salary was at the time pretty substantial. So that helped. Plus bonuses, was able to, take a bonus and throw it at the balance, was super helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing your story. And folks, something I want to make sure you heard in Ian's story is just the power of objectively looking at your situation, taking the shame out of it, taking the emotion out of it, and in listing out your debt in this situation or listing out your current circumstances with any goal, you're actually able to objectively plan a path forward. And I can definitely see how that is the piece that you start on with the folks that you work with. Something that I'm curious about, you mentioned in the beginning of this conversation your motivation and how you continue to get up and do the thing. What do you find motivates people the best in these debt payoff journeys? Because I feel like it's pretty common for folks to be able to justify, like, oh, I just got this bonus. I shouldn't throw it at my debt, or I shouldn't put it into savings. I've been really good on this debt payoff plan. I should go on a vacation or go buy the car or whatever the thing might be. Like, how do you support people, or how do you find, or what do you find works for people in keeping them focused on a long-term goal like this?
I think most people are motivated by their kids, by their family, by you might have seen a family member who got old and didn't have money and it was a struggle. I think like everyone's motivation is going to be different. And I have like, bits and pieces of all of those things. Like my grandmother, she didn't have very much money. She got old. She was in a home, which, wasn't bad. I think my father and his siblings did what they could to make her comfortable and to get her the proper care. But I just remember being in there, just, this is kind of depressing. I definitely know I don't want that when I'm
Mhm.
older. So there's that. There's family, wanting to give your kids the best possible life, wanting to give your spouse the best possible life. I think in terms of motivation, it varies. But for me, I like what you said about objectively looking at your situation and like talking. Sometimes I'll talk to myself
Mhm.
as though I'm like talking to a friend, or I'll just think about it that way, you know, especially when I'm having negative thoughts, because everyone has negative thoughts. But I think if you can kind of talk to yourself like you would a child or a friend, it can really help get to the bottom of the situation. So if you're feeling like really down on yourself about debt, what would you do if a friend came to you that was super
Yeah.
upset, right? And how would you approach that situation? You'd probably get a lot more logical with your thinking and organized. Well, first step you got to do is that I heard this guy Ian talk about like getting organized, right?
Mhm.
You'd get a little bit more, I think, logical. Like that was the term I used before, but you'd probably start to approach the conversation like that a little bit differently.
Yeah. I feel like you're saying just to have more empathy with yourself than maybe you normally would.
It's hard. It's very hard to have empathy for yourself, especially when it's financial. But I think there's a lot of parallels between money and body and like fitness and health. And so, I like personally have like always been trying to get in better shape or eat better and stuff. And you have to look at today as just day one, right? And if you fall
Yeah.
off, right, it's just you get back on. I've been like actually doing so well. Like my eating's been on point, been working out, sleep not so great. But this week I've been feeling a little off. Stomach's been a little off, and I just was gonna get a little down on myself. But I actually like for this doesn't happen that often, but I just said to myself, look, I'm gonna do what I need to do this week. I got to rest up. I'll be better. And like, I'm going to eat as best as I can. I'm going to walk, maybe lift a little bit, but I'm going to try to just do what I can right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And folks, I think I want to double down on what Ian's saying. And like, I think in our society, we have such an all or nothing approach to everything. And I think there are a lot of really big name people in this space, whether it's goals or motivation, or in this case, personal finance, who make you feel pretty bad if you slip up or make a mistake, or God forbid you make an impulse purchase when you're on a budget. It's not the end of the world, but it is whether or not you get back on the plan when you fall off. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, Ian.
100%. Look, I think that structure there is a lot of freedom in structure, ton of it, but it's hard to weigh the concept of structure against restriction, because like we can kind of call it they're like siblings, the two of them. If you say if you look at a budget as structure, well, you are kind of restricting yourself from doing other things. And that's where the motivation really comes into play, and getting super clear on your priorities. Like what do you want to do with, okay, I'll use food as an example. I mean, I could use
Yeah.
money too, but I think food and diet is like something that a lot of people deal with, right? So do you want to be strong and fit? Like, do you have a certain way that you want to look?
Yeah.
Oh, like, is having pizza and cake going to help those goals or hurt those goals? Like just for you. And I'm not saying I'm not going to make a blanket statement here because you might be different. Your metabolism might be fast. These are questions that you have to ask yourself. So if you're at Target and you go in to buy deodorant, but now you've suddenly got like a t-shirt, which literally happened to me today. And I bought the t-shirt. I bought it. Because actually one of my sleep shirts is on its last leg. So I was like, all right, I'm going to get this. But still, if you are struggling with debt and you're like on this regimented plan to pay it off, you gotta think twice in the moment. Is the action that I'm taking an alignment with my goals or not?
Yeah, 100%, y'all. And, another way that I have done with my clients to kind of instill the same idea is just like Ian said, like, is the number one podcaster going to be somebody that jumps on a podcast at 8 o'clock at night because this is the time Ian was able to jump on, or not? Or is the person who is going to run the next half marathon, are they going to choose an apple with a little bit of honey, or are they going to go for the ice cream after dinner? Like, it's just doesn't, we're not saying don't live your life, but we are saying just think about the choices that you're making up front because they do have an impact. And, again, not to shame anyone, but if you are finding yourself in debt, like, more than likely you made some decisions that put yourself there. And it's not to shame anyone, but to just take a look and begin to make choices based on the current set of circumstances that will get you back to the black where you want to be.
Yeah. And I tell this to anybody that I work with. I'm not a miracle worker. I can't pay off your debt. It's like you can't hire a personal trainer and have that person sculpt the abs for you.
Mhm.
You know, like you have to
Yeah.
be the one to do the work. But I can guide you same way that I learned and taught myself. I kind of wish I knew about like a Dave Ramsey back in the day. Maybe I would have gravitated to that. I just didn't know. I didn't know any of this stuff, and nobody was talking about it around.
Mhm.
Nobody. So you got to do the work.
Yeah.
It's inevitable.
Speaking of the people that you work with, something that I'm curious about, because you're coaching into something that's pretty specific.
Mhm.
I think most people can learn from how to set a budget, how to stick to it, things like that. Are there traits that you see in the people that you work with who have a lot of success in paying off debt, building wealth, so on and so forth, versus the people that maybe don't have as much success or maybe don't create any results? And what are the differences you see?
Really, really good question. And when you said that, one particular student came to mind because she just sent me an email and the email was awesome. She came to me with like 60-ish thousand dollars of debt
Mhm.
and we put her on a plan. The numbers were based on her income, her budget, which basically showed if she stuck to the plan, she'd pay off her debt maybe like 7 years sooner, save 20 something thousand dollars. So like it was there. There was like a clear goal for her, which is if she did follow the plan, pretty straightforward, this is what she would save. And she was at every live Q&A we did. She was actively asking me questions. She was just very involved. And she actually emailed me maybe last week saying that she'd already paid off, I think it was like $25,000 of her debt. She
Wow.
had established she opened a Roth IRA. She was contributing money to that. She owns a small business and started a 401k plan. And she's also doing a company match for that. She started an emergency fund. Like some people might hear these things and think they're all basics, but this is someone that didn't know about this stuff. And like I was just like, this is awesome. I gave the phone to my wife. I was like, you have to read this. This is so cool. The point is that she was just involved. She was in it. And if you want to pay off debt, you gotta come face to face, and you really have to you have to kind of like nerd out on the plan. You got to get really behind it. And I have another friend who they recently had their first child, and he's like telling me how hard it is to be a parent and stuff. I have two little kids, by the way, with a third on the
Mhm.
way. And
Congratulations.
thank you. I'm by no means an expert on parenting or anything like that. But um, my therapist told me something which I relate to him, which was, if you care, you're going to be a good parent. Like if you are there, if you show up, if you're trying to figure out how to make yourself better, if you're just like involved, you might screw up along the way, but you can't fail at parenting if like that's your outlook on it. And so I think the same thing works with money. If you're trying to pay off debt, or you're trying to pay off your house, or you're trying to save for retirement and do those things, like if you just show up and maybe you mess up here and there, but like you consistently do the stuff, you can wind up like my my client did, sending me an email that she wasn't the whole way there, but she made some pretty significant gains.
Yeah. Yeah, and shout out to her, by the way. Like that's no joke, because you're not only paying off the debt, sounds like over a third of the way. If she was 60,000 and she paid off 25, and also contributing to retirement, putting together an emergency fund, like that sounds like transformation to me, even if it isn't the all or nothing end result, kind of like we were talking about earlier. I wanted to ask, you brought him up. You are a dad.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
something that I think comes up a lot is, how to maintain a budget when you have children, because you never know when there will be a new need or a new expense. Our son just made the travel soccer team. He's great at soccer, and you wouldn't believe what it costs for a 9-year-old to play travel soccer. And so that's an expense that we are incurring as an investment in him, for his future. How do you budget around things for our children that are unpredictable and are still allowing them to be kids and have an amazing childhood, so to speak?
So that's a great question. Really good question. There's a lot. There's several ways to handle it, and I'll tell you how I do it. I mean, the mathematical ways to handle it are simply adding the line item to your budget, and if you have a relatively predictable income, you compare that income to what your expenses are, right? So you can either do it or you can't do it. But if you find that there is just not enough money to do it right now, the way that I'm handling something somewhat similar, which is I know that I have school tuition payments for my kids. One was just recent, one is coming up, one's in June of next year. So I have just been stocking away any extra money that I get through like a bonus, through, if the kids get like a birthday present or whatever, just put it right into, it's actually in a money market fund right now, getting like
Mhm,
5% interest.
mhm.
So I've been working hard to stash away that money, full well knowing I'm going to part with some of it next year. That's how, I mean, if there's another way to go about it, tell me, but it comes down to having the cash to pay for it. Now, if the problem is there's no cash there, then what I would do is look to see if there's any sort of way to get some kind of assistance. There's a lot of options there. I mean, you could go to the travel league and say, do you offer any scholarships or anything like that? Here's my financial situation. My son, my daughter, they're so excited to play with you guys, but like we just need some help here. So you could go to that organization to ask for help. You can maybe go to the school. You can go to a local, if there are any local charities or like churches or synagogues or mosques, they could also offer some type of financial assistance. There's a lot of programs out there. So if you can't afford it and the money's just not working, go seek out some help, but don't wait to the last minute because it's
Mhm.
only going to disappoint you. It's going to disappoint your child. And yeah, uh, don't wait on it. Take action.
Got it. How old are your kids, Ian?
6, 3.5.
Awesome. And, congrats in advance for the new
Thank
baby on
you.
the way.
Yeah.
Have
Yeah.
you begun educating your children on finances? And if so, what does that look like given their ages?
My 6-year-old sits on a computer and plays with a compounding interest calculator. No, just kidding.
Say that's
I think
wild.
yeah, no. I make the joke to say that like at 6 and 3, I don't think there's a ton that I can do. I like to do math problems with my son, and I'm not that dad that's like the drill sergeant do your math problems. He wanted to wear a watch today, and I was trying to explain to him, that there's the numbers around the dial, and that there are kind of like those dots around that represent the minutes, and you can count by fives. And so I wrote down like how to count by fives, and I showed him that it's a pattern.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
yeah, and so that to me is my contribution right now, where I talk about money in front of them, having this financial education business, which by the way is on the side of my full-time job. I work
Mhm.
for a software company. I don't practice law anymore, but I'm a lawyer a little bit, do like the legal stuff internally. But he kind of laughs when I say the word budget. I think he finds it funny, but he hears me saying it, and so I'm exposing them that.
I love it. Yeah, and I was just curious what your thoughts were because I've heard different trains of thought. Like you need to start your kids young. You need to get them, up on this stuff early. I saw somebody on Instagram the other day who was talking about, something crazy like it's a failure if you're not teaching your kids how to save money at age 3. And it just kind of comes back to the question of what's the balance between like teaching them life skills versus letting them be kids.
So you just have to think, is are you trying to teach your child literally how to save money at 3 years old? Probably not. Like, I don't think that's a skill they can like cognitively grasp,
Mhm.
but they can probably see you at a restaurant, and when you are done, but you still have food left over, like getting a box for your leftovers and bring your leftovers home and then having it for lunch the next day. Like that's something that you're
Yeah.
saving, or just being maybe not, I don't want to say cheap, but being like frugal,
Yeah.
right? Hey, we're not going to get this thing. We've said that to my son. I can't think of, it was recent though. When kids like take things and they're rough with their toys, explaining, hey, that costs money to buy it. We work to get money. We use that money to buy you things. And if you break it, we would have to buy you another one. And we're not going to buy you another one. This is the last thing that you have.
Mhm.
So I think there are teachable moments. You don't want to overwhelm your kids, which I probably overwhelm them with teachable moments, and my wife doesn't. So I think we balance each other out. But teach them with things going on in your life rather than sitting down and being like, here's how money works. I don't think it's going to connect with them right now.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your thoughts on that for sure. And just to switch gears here a little bit, if you had to instill maybe just 3 things that any person could take away in terms of personal finance, regardless of they're massively in debt or if they're literally building their wealth at this point, what are the things you would want them to know to take away from this conversation?
When you ask that question, do you mean things like concepts or like personality traits?
Concepts, truths, if you got like a maxim that really
Okay,
resonates with the people you work with.
3 things. Okay, so I'm really big on organization. and numbers.
Mhm.
Like I think they all kind of work together. So I think that if you are in debt, you got to dive into the numbers somehow. It really is a math game. There's a whole mental component and psychological component to it. But I would say number one is get yourself organized and dive into the numbers, which organization can look like what I mentioned before, which is like literally writing down all of your debts. If you don't know how much you owe or the extent of your debts, there's no better time to do that than right now.
Yeah.
And you might have to pull out your credit card statements, your loan balances, and it's going to probably scare the heck out of you.
Mhm.
But go do that. And along with that, doesn't hurt. I have a free download where you can do this. IanBuildsWealth.com/budget. You can literally enter in all of your expenses, and you do it for the last 3 months. It gives you an average, and you can see what you're spending, and it gives you like another sheet to input your income, and it tells you how much you got left over. So like that's to me those three things, your debts, your income, your expenses, like you do all that, that's fantastic. You're organized. You've got it all in place now, and you can start to make decisions from a place of knowledge. So that's number one. Number two, I would say that there is a whole lot of people that have debt. Credit card debt is over $1 trillion in the country. Student debt has a massive impact on people, and it prevents them from doing a lot of things in life, like buying a house, like starting a family. A lot of that's been delayed. It's proven that that's been delayed, especially for millennials. So that is a common form of debt. But there's another form of debt that I don't think a lot of people realize. There's a knowledge debt in society. People just don't know about concepts like compounding interest. They want to appear wealthy and rich, and they want the cars and they want the watches and stuff. But what about the real assets that if you have them in the bank, they could be growing? And so I think you might not necessarily have financial debt, but if you're not learning this stuff, then there is a knowledge debt that is going to impact your ability to literally build wealth and grow your money.
Mhm.
So that's two, is deal with not just financial debt, but the knowledge debt that exists in the country. And then the third is putting the numbers aside, putting the lack of education aside. You have to live your life too.
Mhm.
So you need to figure out how to make all of this work in the context of your life. Tomorrow is not promised for any of us. And so it would kind of suck to like do all this stuff and say, I'm going to retire at 60. And then 59, you've been doing all these things and you just like get hit by a bus or something.
Right.
Knock on wood.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
So how do you make it all work while like enjoying life, going on the vacation or eating out at a restaurant? It's a balancing act for everybody, but I think I want to acknowledge that you need to enjoy the moment. You need to enjoy the present, and you need to kind of plan for the future at the same time. And it's hard, but it's really important that people start to grapple with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And other than your own resources, which we are going to make sure folks are linked in the description below, in the show notes, made readily available so that you can continue this conversation with Ian and also enlist his support. I've actually downloaded the budget tool on his website. I actually am about to dive into it myself, but am super excited. I love how everything's laid out. It's pretty intuitive for me. I'm not great setting things up like this for myself, and it's all laid out for you. So, other than your own tools, what are like a couple of books and resources that you found helpful that you would recommend to anybody?
In terms of tools, I use a budgeting app called Copilot. It's
Oh, okay.
awesome. And any day now, I will have another free download that will not only give you a link to, it will double the free trial of Copilot, but it will walk you through the exact way I track my spending, and it will pair like exactly with the budget download. So
Nice.
stay tuned for that. Maybe by the time this episode airs, it'll be ready to go. I'll give you the link.
Yeah.
So I love that. I use it. Super helpful, very easy to use. And then in terms of books, there's so many out there. There's like the classics, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Millionaire Next Door, The Psychology of Money. I think honestly, one of the best tools is just YouTube.
Hmm.
If you are curious, and like I said, like the client of mine that had all that success, she was just very curious. I think curiosity is such an important trait. Connect with that curiosity and just YouTube, yeah, the book summary, like find any book and just YouTube a summary. I actually downloaded this app, the Headway app. It's like book summaries. They give you the summary
Nice.
in like 10 minutes. So it's like a YouTube summary in an app. Local library, by the way. You don't have to go to Amazon and buy all this stuff. Go to the library, go to Money Books, and just take one out, flip through it, skim through it, right? Like those are like all between YouTube, your library, some apps and stuff. Like there's no lack of this information out there. And follow me on Instagram too. I post a lot of free stuff, so that should help as well.
Yeah, and folks, I have been following Ian for over a year now. I love his content. It's educational and quite honestly, Ian, if I can acknowledge you, it feels like an older brother just kind of giving me advice, which I really appreciate. Folks, if you're kind of turned off by some of the condescension in the financial help space, Ian is definitely a breath of fresh air in that regard. And Ian, I know that we've mentioned your website and Instagram a couple times, but just once more for the listeners, where is the best place or places for people to continue the conversation with you off of this show?
The best place is Instagram at IanBuildsWealth. And that handle is, you can find me on any of the socials. I'm active on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it these days. I'm active on Instagram, and I'll do you all one better. If you want to send me an email, it's just Ian at IanBuildsWealth.com. And I appreciate the older brother comparison. I am an older brother. I have got two younger siblings. So if you want some older brother advice, just shoot me an email or send me a DM on Instagram. I'll get right back to
Ian, thank you so much for being on the show this week. And folks, before we sign off, again, I know you got something out of today's episode, so please share this with somebody. Ian's message today, I know, lit a fire under my butt to continue to pay off debt, build my nest egg, so to speak. And I'm sure it can benefit someone else too. So please share that out with somebody. And also, if you're catching this on Spotify, please give this show a 5-star review. Ian, if we can just ask before we head out today, what are you acknowledging yourself for today?
you. Oh, I didn't expect that question. What am I acknowledging? I'm acknowledging myself for having had a wonderful conversation with you.
Well,
I
thank
didn't know
you.
what to expect. So I thought the time flew by. I'm acknowledging myself today for, I think I'd say slowing down a bit. Like I said, I've been feeling a little bit under the weather the last week, and it's the end of the year. We all kind of
Mhm.
want to finish strong. And I've just said to myself, you know what? Slow down, feel good. Next week will be better. Next week will probably be hectic because I've got family coming into town. But today I'm acknowledging myself for going just a little bit slower.
I love it. I love it. And Ian, again, thank you so much for being on today. We'll need to have you on again in the future. This was an amazing conversation, and I'm sure the listeners are going to eat this right up. So, folks, again, this has been your Inside Track to Success. I'm your host, Stewart Kraintz. We'll catch you next week.